Thank you so much for having me today, and I'm so excited to be here with everyone. What we're going to do is just spend a few quick minutes talking about one of the biggest things that's been impacting so many people, especially over the last few months with everything going on with COVID. So just really quickly, I'm going to give you some practical sleep tips. We're not going to be able to cover everything in a quick 20 minutes, but we're going to give you some really great key practical things that you can apply that'll set you off on the right track today to really get your sleep optimized. Make sure you have some knowledge about some of the core components that really drive our sleep so you can take control back over it. At the end of the day, my goal for you is I truly want you to be able to fall asleep within about 10 to 15 minutes, sleep straight through the night, and wake up the next day feeling rested so you can really take on your day. So we'll spend about 20 minutes or so giving you some information, and then I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for some follow-ups and for some questions. Okay, so let's jump right in. And so oftentimes when we first talk about sleep, it's important to remind everybody why we need sleep. Because what I found is that it's so common these days for us to try to convince ourselves that we don't need sleep, especially because we don't seem to ever have enough time to get enough of that sleep. You'll hear people say, you know, time is money, I'll sleep when I'm dead, snooze you lose, and so many things in society that have pushed us towards thinking that, you know, the first one in at work and the last one to leave, and if you're showing you're tired, that means you're being productive. But instead, we're seeing that sleep is such an important piece for us, for our health and for our mindset, and really for us to be much more efficient and productive. So just a quick reminder that with our sleep, we know that it's important for body restoration, for memory consolidation, our memory, attention, focus, concentration. Additionally, it is really important for our metabolism. Actually, when we're sleeping better, we actually find that we're going to be in better shape and our body is able to process that. We actually take in less calories in the sense of putting on unwanted pounds that we don't want. And also our immune system, which we know having a sharp, strong immune system right now is especially important with everything going on with our global pandemic. Additionally, the daytime alertness and concentration. And that's a big piece that sometimes when we're thinking about sleep, we tend to focus on what's happening at night and not always remembering that daytime fatigue can be one of the biggest indicators that we're not getting the quality of sleep. Even if we're in bed or if we're sleeping, it doesn't always mean that we feel fully rested. And so I'm going to tell you some strategies to deal with that today. And then, of course, our ability to respond to challenges. Even if our physical body is feeling rested, but we're not really getting that quality sleep, oftentimes, again, that can have our effects on our ability to respond to challenges and our attention and focus and concentration. So just a quick reminder that oftentimes when there's lots of things that are causing us stress and making us feel anxious, and there's so many things that we're having to take care of, many times we forget to take care of ourselves or we focus on everyone else. And so just that quick reminder, you know, those days when we were thinking about when we used to be able to travel and we would be told to put our mask on before assisting other people, it's going to be really important for us to get our sleep in the right place so then we're going to be able to feel rested to take on the challenges and help everyone else as well. And with that caveat, reminding that if we have a bed partner, a spouse, a partner, or children, or other people that are sleeping in our households, this is a great thing to learn for ourselves, and then we can share those tips with them as well. So one of the first things that I want to talk about is one of the biggest myths that is out there about our sleep. And one of the biggest myths that's currently out there is that every single person needs 8 hours of sleep. When we talk about 8 hours, what I want to do is help you to understand that that is an average. If you took the average woman right now, you know, we're talking to all our savvy ladies today, the average woman's shoe size right now is an 8.5 to a 9 in America. Well, that doesn't mean that somebody isn't wearing a size 10 and that somebody isn't wearing a size 6.5. And so it's that same thing with our sleep, that actually what we want to determine is what our body's ideal amount is. Some of us are what are called rapid cyclers or short sleepers. Some of us need more time. And I'm going to talk to you today about how to determine what your ideal sleep window is so that you can have the best consolidated, best quality of your sleep. The other part of this myth that is one of these terrible jokes that the universe plays on us is that actually the older we get, the less sleep we need. So if you look at this figure here that I've reproduced from Michael Perlis's work, what you'll see is actually the older we are, the less sleep we need. This is actually one of the terrible jokes that the universe plays on us because we're young and we're busy and we're active and we're tired and we never seem to be able to get enough sleep. And then as we become more mature and we grow in wisdom and we've now retired and we've earned that time to sleep, We're waking up at 3 a.m. Why is that happening? And so that's one of the things that we're going to talk about, determining your ideal sleep window. But what you want to think about with this aging piece is that if we talk about, remember, why sleep is necessary and why sleep is important, one of the biggest things that goes along with that is our sleep is for that growth and for that restoration. And so if you think of a newborn baby and how much they're constantly growing, and from a newborn how much sleep they need compared to an 8-month-old. Take an 8-month-old compared to a 2-year-old, to an 8-year-old, to a 15-year-old, and so on. What you'll see is the same thing. It's less sleep is needed as we get older. Once we hit our mid-20s, about 24 to 27, that's when our brain finally hits the point where it stops developing. Actually, it can take up to around age 27. And the last parts that develop are judgment, decision-making, and impulse control. So I will leave that piece with you for another day. But that's why typically we see a lot of individuals in their late 20s, early 30s, and so on and so forth. Our sleep needs are starting to change even that early. And so what happens is if our mind is telling us that we need 8 hours and we have to get 8 hours, but our body is needing less, then we can be in conflict. There's actually a lot of research that's been done where they've examined that, where they've had people sleep, go to bed when they're tired, wake up when they feel rested, and when the individuals didn't know how much time they were sleeping, there was a subgroup that slept for about 6 hours, and they would wake up and feel rested and take on the day. Then when they put them back into their regular living circumstances and they saw the sun and saw the clock, the next day when they woke up after 6 hours, guess what happened? That group reported feeling tired because their mind was overriding what their physical body needed. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people that need 8 hours and that isn't the average. And I'm not saying that there also aren't people that need more than that. All I want to do is debunk that myth that every single person has to follow that cookie cutter piece, and not every single person is going to also need the same amount of sleep throughout the course of their life. So with that thought, let's talk about how do we really determine what sleep we need? What does this look like? Well, in order to truly do that, the other question that I want you to be thinking to yourselves for a second is, if we're thinking about repair, do we think that our mind is going to be repairing itself first, or that our body is going to be repairing ourselves first? If we're not getting enough sleep, what do we think is going to have the priority? So I want you to answer that question to yourself. I'm not going to make you call yourselves out or put that in the chat. But as you're thinking about this next bit of information I'm going to give you, we're going to answer that question, and it's going to help to bring a lot of other pieces together. So in order for us to get the right amount of sleep that we need, it's really important for us to quickly understand how sleep works. So with this figure, what we have here is I want to talk to you about the different stages that we go through whenever we're sleeping. So whenever you're first falling asleep, you're going to be in stage 1. This takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And for most people, when you're falling asleep at this point, if you woke up, you wouldn't even realize that you were asleep. This is where a lot of people experience that myoclonic jerk, that kind of where you feel like you're falling into sleep. This is where a lot of our senses, our sound and hearing and smell and all these things, our different senses are starting to shut down, so we're not waking up as easily. For the average person, this takes about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we get into stage 2 sleep, which for today, all intents and purposes, think of it as a transition phase. So if you're driving a manual transmission, we don't go from first gear straight to third gear. We have to transition through second gear. And then we get to stage 3. And so this is what's going to answer that first question I asked you, is that in stage 3, this is what we know or what we've heard of people talking about is deep sleep, slow wave sleep. This is where your body is repairing itself. So what you see is what's important is this here, this is one cycle of sleep. And in this one cycle of sleep, this can take anywhere from 90 to 110 minutes on average. It's about an hour and a half to almost 2 hours. Here, we haven't seen anything talk about our mind yet. So after we get through one cycle of sleep, now since the body doesn't have to go through stage 1 again, we don't have to fall asleep again, what's going to happen is we're going to now see REM sleep occur, rapid eye movement, which you hear a lot of people talk about. This is where our mind is repairing itself. This is where we tend to dream in this REM sleep. So now we're going to see that we're going to have REM sleep, we're going to have that stage 2 transition into stage 3 body repair. Again, we're getting through another cycle, and throughout the rest of the night, we're going to go back and forth between REM sleep and stage 3 sleep. And so across the course of the night, you can see here, so just to give the example, let's say that we needed to get through 4 of these cycles in order to be able to have our full rest. Well, if you rapidly cycle through at about 90 minutes, that means it would be 90 minutes, 3 hours, 4.5, 6. At the end of that, it would take about 6 hours to get through that process. But if you're at the 110 minutes at almost 2 hours, 2, 4, 6, 8. So that's why what we see for individuals is that it's going to be different depending on how quickly your body moves through that repair process. It's the same thing as metabolism and hunger. So if you think about it, you can have two people that look exactly the same, and one person might need 1,800 calories that day, and another person might need 2,200. It's just based on their body and how their metabolism is working. And it's going to be the same thing with sleep. So as we're going through here, as we're understanding these different stages and that we're going through how this gets to the body repair and the mind repair, is think about it in terms of a balance, in terms of a scale. So at the beginning of the night, we're spending a lot more time with our body repairing and less time with our mind repairing. Throughout the course of the night, we're going to see it even out, and by the end of the night, we're going to be spending a lot more time in this REM sleep as our body is going through that process throughout the course of the night. So what happens is that's one of the reasons why for a lot of people, they're going to see a lot more of that dreaming in the early morning hours. The other thing to remember with dreaming when we're in that REM sleep is that that's going to be a lot more like the brain waves of when we're awake. Because during that REM sleep, that's where our mind is basically making sense and sorting through everything that happens throughout the day. So if you took, you're busy throughout the day and you had all these papers on your desk and you had to sort through and decide, okay, what am I going to file away because I might need that later? What's not important I can throw away? What am I currently working on? Your brain's doing that same thing. Does it matter if you had oatmeal or cereal for breakfast? Maybe not as much, but it's important to file away the name of your coworker's new baby. And so all these things are happening. But what is really important to know is that if we are not sleeping straight through the night, we're going to be cheating ourselves out of REM. How that happens, let me go back here for a second to show you. So if we look at this figure, we're going through stage 1, 2, 3, REM 2, 3 through the rest of the night. Every time we wake up, what happens is we have to start over, and we have to start over. So if we're waking up multiple times throughout the night and we're continuing to have to start over, that means that we're not getting as much of that REM sleep as we needed because we're constantly here at this place because we're still waiting for our body to be able to sleep straight through the night. So let's talk about how we can make that happen. And how to make that happen is truly going to have this idea of setting up your ideal sleep window, determining how much sleep your body needs. And again, it can be more or less than 8 hours, and it's going to change throughout the course of your life. And so the first thing that we want to do is we want to figure out how much sleep you are currently getting. So if we're going to count up the total number of hours on average that you're getting in a 24-hour period. So if you not get time in bed, so not getting in bed and spending an hour reading or watching TV, but when you are actually unconscious and asleep. So if we were to add that up and say, okay, by the time I fall asleep and wake up and fall asleep, for example's sake, let's say that's about 6 hours right now. So then what we would do is we determine, okay, what is going to be your ideal wake-up time 7 days a week? So let's look at that. So what is that? So let's say that, okay, the earliest I have to wake up is 6 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays because I have a workout class that day. Or maybe that's the day that I have to have my kids get up earlier to be able to get them on the bus for school. And of course, right now, our schedules are all over the place because we're not having as much of the commuting. We're not getting kids ready for school. And so we're starting to change and not have that consistent schedule. And that is such one of the biggest problems is when we're not having a consistent bed and wake time 7 days a week, our body's going to get confused. It doesn't know when it's supposed to fall asleep. It doesn't know when it's going to wake up. And it doesn't know how much sleep we're going to give it. So it's not able to come up with that healthy balance to know how much time it can spend repairing the body and how much time it can spend repairing the mind. Why is that the body repairs first? Well, think of it from evolution. If you were in your tent and you're hearing noises in the woods, you want your legs to work so you're able to run away from whatever it was. It doesn't matter if your mind can determine if it was a lion or a bear. So we're going to pick that set wake-up time, and let's say 6 a.m. is the earliest you have to wake up across the 7 days. We're going to then work our way backwards. So since we said right now we're getting 6 hours, that would mean your current sleep window would be from midnight to 6 a.m. That would mean that even if you're getting tired at 11:45 at night, you're not going to get in bed until midnight. That also means that if you don't fall asleep until 4 in the morning, you're still going to get out of bed at 6. And you're going to stay awake that whole next day until midnight. Maybe for you, 6 a.m. is the earliest you have to wake up, but midnight is just way too much, way too late for you. It's okay to do 11 to 5 or do 10 to 4, but the key is that we don't want to be spending more time in bed than what our body's needing. So along those lines, we set our bedtime and our wake time, and we're going to stick with that schedule for 7 days. So say we're doing that 12 to 6 for 7 days. You're going to find that you're going to feel really sleepy by the time 12 rolls around. But how great is that maybe there's been so many days where you lie in bed for hours and hours trying to fall asleep, and now you're so tired that you are falling asleep within 10 to 15 minutes. And because we're tired enough, we're going to sleep straight through minus that bathroom break. And then what we're going to find is when we're going to wake up that next day. And you may feel tired at the beginning because your body's trying to adjust and trying to determine what the sleep is going to be. That's why it's really important to stick with that for 7 days. After 7 days, if you're falling asleep within 10 to 15 minutes, sleeping straight through minus the bathroom break, waking up and still feeling tired, then we're going to add 15 minutes to that sleep window. So now it's going to be 11:45 to 6, and we're going to do that for 7 days. We're still feeling tired, 11:30 to 6. I know 15 minutes doesn't sound like a lot of time, but that is so much enough to really throw off your entire sleep schedule and to really adjust for your body. Now, to give you a few other quick things, I know we're going through this quickly, but I want to respect your time. One of the other things that I want to talk to you about, why is it that we have to have that set window? Why is it so important that we go to bed and wake up and that we sleep straight through? Well, I talked to you about, when we're waking up and why we're missing out on REM. And so to give you a great analogy, we'll talk about pizza for a minute, since we've been talking about food and hunger and these different pieces. So if I had 6 inches of pizza dough and I put it in a 6-inch pie pan and spread it out like this gentleman here, you would see it look nice and thick and even and meet all the edges of that pie pan. But if I then took the 6 inches of pie and I tried to put it in a 10-inch pie pan and spread it out to reach the edges, what's going to happen is it's going to look something more like this. It's going to have holes. It's going to have gaps in it because I'm trying to stretch it and make it fit where there's not enough of that pizza pie dough to fit. And so sometimes we do that, where we want to extend our time in bed. Maybe bed is that safe, warm place, or it's where we can get away from everything else that's going on, or we didn't sleep well the night before, so now we want to jump in bed and try to catch up on sleep. But by extending that time in bed, it actually makes our sleep quality less and not as productive. So we want it to be nice and even like this, and that's why we want to be having a set window where we're able to consolidate our sleep, like defragging your computer to sleep straight through the night. Additionally, part of that too is as I talked about our brain being confused, we want to talk about with our bed. So if I said to you I was going to go to the movies and I was going to get a snack, and I asked you what snack comes to mind, most people would say popcorn. That doesn't mean there aren't snow caps and soda and other kinds of things, but the general connection is movie theater and popcorn. With that same strength of a connection, that's what we want your brain to do. We want it to see bed and think sleep, think rest, think relaxation. And so that's one of the important reasons why your bed is important for sleeping in. Your bed should not be used for reading, watching TV, checking your phone, doing your emails, all these other pieces. Because our brain is going to get confused. Is my bed a place for rest and relaxation, or is it a time when I'm awake? Is it a time when I'm worrying? Is it a time when I'm processing and doing all these other things? And that's something that we do we can talk through, some of our other strategies and techniques when we have more time about some of those pieces of how do I shut my brain off? How do I deal with, for instance, things like drinking too much caffeine too close to bedtime and all those other pieces. But right now, the first key pieces are to have that set sleep schedule and window. It's amazing how important that is. And also to be using your bed just for sleep. The bed should be reserved for sleep and sex, and that's it. Just like we train a new puppy that it has to potty outside, we want to be training our brain that we're going to be reading outside of bed, watching TV outside of bed, worrying outside of bed. And I know for a lot of people, they turn to these techniques and strategies because there's so much going on throughout the day that they're trying to find ways to distract their mind. But what ends up happening is it ends up confusing your brain more and making it harder for it to get sleep whenever we're actually crawling into bed. It's the same reason why we don't want to be sleeping anywhere other than our bed at night. So because I know we said we wanted to keep it at a quick 20 minutes, I want to stop there with some of the basic information, and then I want to turn it over to the Savvy Ladies for you all in the chat with your questions so we can address more of those pieces for you. And of course, I have on here the information for Birch Cove, an amazing organization we can do where you're going to be getting a follow-up email from us with our sleep guide with more techniques and strategies and for other opportunities to learn more about how to understand your sleep and quiet your mind so that you can optimize your performance as well.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Milanak. That was excellent. Thanks for all those tips in there. I will remind everyone, if you have a question now, you can use the chat box, or you can also email info@savvyladies.org, and I'll get started with the first question we have for you, which is saying, I have anxiety and let small life events get to me. I often take a Tylenol PM when I think I'm not going to be able to get to sleep. I feel like I've developed a bad habit that now I need help to fall asleep. Do you have some advice for me?
Sure. That's a really great question. And what you're describing is what a lot of people have happening, is that there's a time in our lives where something's happened. We're really stressed. We're really worried. We're not able to shut our brain off. We've had a few nights where we're not falling asleep as well as we'd like, and we start relying on other things. That's the same as we talked about with trying to go to bed earlier. One of the things that we would recommend is to do a wind down bedtime routine before bed so that your brain is going to start to learn when it's time to go to sleep. So instead of having to rely on that medication, doing things like some relaxation exercises, a really important one that works for a lot of individuals is a progressive muscle relaxation strategy, PMR, which is really great to be able to, you kind of just have this opportunity to overly tighten and release the muscles head to toe. There's some really great free recordings of this, and I can also send that information out. Or doing for some folks, whether it's doing meditation or mindfulness strategies and other different things to kind of be able to clear their mind. Because what happens is when we start thinking, I need this to fall asleep, like I have to watch TV or I have to read or do that, then we start to connect that with falling asleep, and it does make it harder for our body to be able to do that. And there are a lot of other strategies that we can do to shut our mind off as well, but that's a really quick one, as well as a 4-count breath is another really great strategy. So doing a quick 4 counts, 1, 2, 3, 4, breathing in, holding it, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then slowly breathing out, 1, 2, 3, 4. It takes about 10 to 12 seconds to do that. It's a really great grounding exercise, and it helps to slow your breathing rate down to the respiration rate of when we're sleeping. So what's great with that opportunity is that it helps when your body is being scanned. Your brain says, oh, her breathing has slowed down. There mustn't be a threat. There mustn't be the things that are causing anxiety. I can let her body relax and start to fall asleep. What other questions do we have?
Great, thanks. The next one is asking if there's such a thing as oversleep, i.e. that feeling of being a daylight zombie, drowsy and listless throughout the day.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So one of the things that we find is that for folks that are sleeping too much, that actually can be just as detrimental for folks sleeping not enough. That's one of the reasons why we want to get that ideal sleep window. Additionally with that, what we find is that what happens is for a lot of people when they're oversleeping, their body is going to be in different stages of sleep that are going to make it harder to wake up. It's the same thing with naps. That's one of the reasons why we say napping isn't helpful, because not only does it cut down on your sleepiness to sleep through the night, but most people when they're napping, they end up waking up when they're in that stage 3 deep sleep. It would just be like turning off your car when it was in 3rd gear instead of downshifting to neutral. So it's really important that when we stick with a set schedule, your body is going to learn and it's going to transition you into that REM sleep when it's about time to wake up so that you feel much more awake.
Okay, great, thanks. We had a few questions come in about waking up during the night, and some here mentioning watching TV and feeling like they need the TV to fall back asleep, looking at a clock, if that's a bad thing to do. So kind of combining a few questions, but it's questions about waking up during the night and how to fall back asleep.
Sure. No, those are great questions. So the first piece is that you should not check the clock, Because what's going to happen is as soon as you check the clock, your mind's going to start processing and thinking either, oh my gosh, I've only been asleep for a few hours, or it might start thinking, oh, well, I'm supposed to wake up in the next hour and 45 minutes. Am I going to be able to get up? And then we keep checking. If you wake up in the middle of the night and you've been awake for around 10 to 15 minutes, not checking the clock, but if it feels like 15 minutes, it probably is, one of the best things you can do is actually get out of bed until you feel sleepy and then get back in bed again. Because when we're laying in bed and we're tossing and turning and we're worrying, what happens is that we start to associate our bed with that stress and that frustration. If you are getting out of bed, we want to be doing things that are going to be of low impact. So if you're getting up to use the restroom, for instance, don't turn on all the lights. Use a small night light, because when we turn on all the lights, that light actually gets detected and wakes our brain up. There's this little part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, that gets messages from our optic nerve that when it sees light, it flips the switch on and says it's time to be awake. That's the same thing with watching television or other things in the middle of the night, checking our phone. If you're going to watch television, you want to have all the rest of the lights off, and you want to be pretty far away from it. Also, one of the recommendations I say to sit with your head and your hands resting on your knees. So when you start to nod off and start to fall asleep again, it's important that it'll wake you up and you'll be able to get back in your bed instead of sleeping on the couch. We don't want to be checking our phones. We don't want to be, reading anything work-related or anything that is going to wake our brain up, because it's going to make it harder and harder for it to shut off.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. And I see we have a few more questions for you. So this next one is asking what about if you only have one small bedroom where you're sleeping, doing work, reading, etc.? Especially right now, there are many households dealing with quarantine and limited on space. So tips for if you're confined to one tiny space.
That's a great question. I actually get this a lot when I'm working with college students or individuals that are new in the business area, and they have a small studio apartment, for instance, and maybe the bed's the only couch or place to work. One of the biggest things that we would usually recommend is finding some way to distinguish between when your bed is being used for sleep and if it's being used as the couch or for something else. So, for instance, sitting on the edge of the bed and doing some work, or making sure that the bed is fully made and that you're sitting at the edge and using it to work on, but when it's time for bed, that you're pulling the covers back, that you're crawling into it, something to distinguish. Maybe it's sitting, for some folks even right now, they may be sleeping on a couch because they're staying with friends and it's the pull-out bed, and they put it, so we recommend putting the bed back in and sitting on the sofa as the sofa that day, and then opening it back up at night to distinguish something that sets it apart as the place when it's time to sleep, so we can have all of those triggers. It's just like if you think of classical conditioning, the example of Pavlov's dog, where they would ring a bell and the dog would salivate because the dog signified food. We want there to be distinct things that is going to be that you're able to determine that connection between the bed and time to sleep. It's a great question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
What else do we have?
The next one is asking, what would you recommend for parents that have their sleep interrupted?
So a couple of things are going to depend on how old the child is. So for, obviously when you were in those new stages of having a baby, you were just trying to survive. And you were sleeping when the baby sleeps and all those other pieces. And that's part of what comes in with the do's and don'ts. We want to be careful to not then be extending our time in bed. If we had a bad night of sleep, we don't want to go to bed early, because it's going to be like that pizza dough where it's going to expand the window. If you do have the children that are waking you up multiple times throughout the night, but oftentimes what happens is that what we'll find is that the parents are maybe not getting as great a sleep at night, but then they're trying to do things during the day to supplement that. So maybe it's drinking a lot of caffeine. Well, it can take up to 7 to 8 hours for the body to metabolize the caffeine in 1 cup of coffee. So we don't want to be overly doing the caffeine during the day or drinking it too late at night. We really want to be doing our best to stick with that sleep window, that schedule. So even if we have one night where we're waking up numbers of times, it may be that we might add 15 minutes to give ourselves a little bit of buffer, but we don't want to be spending an extra hour trying to sleep, because it's going to reduce the quality of our sleep. If you have children that are older and it's that they keep coming out of their bedroom, but they really are at an age where they can sleep in their own room, one of the things that works really well is something called the bedtime pass. And so that's something that the parents would make with the child, whether it is a stuffed animal or a sheet or a certificate. And how this works is that the kiddo is allowed to use it once a night. They can come out of their room for whatever reason after they've gone to bed. They turn it in, but once they've turned it in, that's their one kind of get out of jail free card for the night. But then what happens is that if the child comes out of the bedroom multiple times afterwards, this is where it does take some strength on the parent's part, just like when you take away a blanket or a pacifier, is when that child comes out after they've used that pass, it's really not having much of an interaction, just very quietly and calmly redirecting them back into their bed. And those kiddos will do a really great job of tearing at your heartstrings and, but Mom, you don't love me and you don't want to hug me and I just want to kiss. But you have to push through that piece. But the other side of it is when they're not using that bedtime pass, if they keep it all night, then they get to trade it in the next morning. Maybe it's a fun little set of stickers or something from the dollar store if they can build up enough of those to get to do something fun with their mom, with their dad. So there's those pieces with the older children and really directing them, and there's a lot more we can go into, at a different time, or I can answer some individual questions later about the children that are leaving their bed. But for those that the kids are younger, if it is that you're truly having extreme disrupted sleep, you're not sleeping great at night, if we have to do anything with any rest during the day, it should be 20 minutes or less, because any more than that, any napping during the day will actually disrupt your ability to sleep through the night at night. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Yes, it looks like we have 2 more questions, if you have time for those.
Of course.
Okay, great. The next one is asking for tips on how to deal with constant fatigue, even in the morning after waking up.
So there'd be a couple questions that I would want to follow up with this, because if it is that you are falling asleep, sleeping straight through the night, waking up and still feeling fatigued and tired, the first thing we would do is we'd want to work on titrating or extending that sleep window and doing this 15 minutes each week, because for a lot of people it's that they're just truly not getting enough sleep at night. If you are sleeping straight through and you're saying, look, I'm getting 8 or 9 hours of sleep and I'm still feeling tired and fatigued, then this would be the point when we would typically refer someone to go in for a sleep study, because oftentimes this person may be having some sleep apnea, which does occur for a lot of individuals as we see at different stages in life. Additionally, depending on the position that we're sleeping in, for a lot of people sleeping on their back or snoring, we see this happening, and this reduces your body's ability to get as much oxygen as it needs, which consequently you don't get as restful sleep. And there are some folks that do have some idiopathic hypersomnolence, or this where they just need extreme amounts of sleep. So the first trick would be to follow the sleep window. That's why we always talk about that first, to be able to extend and see what that ideal window is. And if the person still is feeling fatigued during the day, then that's where we would then talk to a sleep specialist about next steps.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And the last question for you is asking if you have any more tips on falling asleep, because lately it's taken me 2 to 3 hours to fall asleep.
So the biggest thing for a lot of people with falling asleep, so there's 2 pieces. So lately for a lot of people, what they've been doing is they found that they were really active whenever they were out before everything that happened with COVID. And so if you were running and you were active and you were going to the gym, and then all of a sudden now you're not as active, for a lot of folks, your body's not going to need as much sleep because there's not as much to repair. If it is the fact that you're laying in bed and you're tossing and turning, or maybe it's just that you've been spending a lot more time in bed and you've been extending that sleep window, well, if we haven't built up enough sleepiness throughout the day, we're not going to be tired enough to fall asleep. Excuse me. Another piece for a lot of people with the 2 to 3 hours is that we're finding that they're having a really hard time shutting their brain off. And so one of the kind of golden or key tips that we would typically recommend is that when you're getting ready for bed, one of the things that we want you to do is I want to have you take a notepad and a pen. And don't do this on your phone. Don't do this on technology or on any computer. But before you get into bed, you're going to sit down and you're going to set a timer on your phone for about 5 minutes to start. Ideally, this will get up to about 10 to 15 minutes, but 5 minutes is really hard to do at the beginning. You're going to sit down, and on the right-hand side of that sheet of paper, on that notepad, you're going to write your to-do list for the next day. Because you're going to think about, do I have to send these emails? Do I have to call the bank? What do I need to do? And because what happens is we're going to crawl into bed, and our mind's still going to be running and racing with everything we have to do the next day. Just like when you want to turn off your computer and you push the button and it says such and such is running in the background, what happens is that the hardware is ready to shut down, but the software isn't finished running. So you're going to take that notepad and a pen. On the right-hand side, you're going to go in and you're going to write down your to-do list for the next day. And then on the left-hand side, you are going to literally brain dump everything that's running through your mind. What am I worried about? What am I thinking about? For the first minute, it's going to be all the basics that you're already thinking, oh, I'm worried about my kids and health and finances. But when you really don't pick up that pen and you keep writing for a solid 5 minutes, what ends up happening and what you see is that all this stuff is going to come out that you didn't realize was running through your mind. And we're not creating worries. When I work with so many business people and corporate executives and individuals in really high stress positions, even just parenting, because that's also stressful in its own way, is that they say, well, I don't want to be worrying more. I want to be shutting my brain off. And what happens is that we're teaching our brain that it's going to get that time to process, but outside of bed. After about 5 minutes of writing, you're going to feel exhausted, the same way you would after that kind of cathartic, really yell to get that angry out or that ugly cry. And so what this is going to do is it's going to free your mind. It's going to empty it. You're going to put that notepad on your nightstand, and you're going to crawl into bed. And your mind is going to be empty because you've just completely dumped everything that was in your brain. If you find that it starts running and racing again, you get out of bed and do more writing. Same thing if you wake up in the middle of the night and your brain is running and racing. Write on that notepad the email you want to send the next day, what you want to target the next day, instead of turning on all your technology and all those bright lights. And what you'll find, again, like I gave the example of the puppy training at the potty outside, you're teaching your brain that it's not allowed to worry in bed, and it will help you to be able to fall asleep faster. So doing that wind down routine, doing the relaxation strategies, doing the brain dump, reducing the amount of light that we're exposed to before bedtime, and also reducing the amount of caffeine that we're taking in, other substances as well. I know we didn't cover with alcohol and nicotine and those things where a lot of people think relax them, but actually reduce your ability to get quality sleep. There's so much more that I'd love to cover with you. So please follow up with Birch Cove so that we can definitely answer more of those questions for you.
Okay, definitely. And thanks for all that helpful information there. As Dr. Milanak mentioned, we will be sending out some more further information and Dr. Milanak's contact information as well. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today, asking lots of great questions. And I want to thank you so much, Dr. Milanak, for a really excellent presentation. I'm sure everyone will be sleeping a lot better tonight after listening to you speak today.
Thank you so much for having us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Milanak. Bye-bye.